Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I think it's important that we talk about grief, especially in this context, because I feel like there's not a lot of room and patience given to people who are grieving the loss of a loved one in death. I really think that when it comes to gaining some understanding around grief and how that shows up even after a relationship with a toxic person. So that, we're not just grieving the loss of that person, we're not just grieving the loss of the relationship that has existed up until now. We're also grieving the future, right? So when it comes to relationships, and I'm talking about romantic relationships in particular, when the relationship ends, even if there's a huge part of us that knows that it was toxic, that it was unhealthy, that the person that we fell in love with is not the person that we're meant to be with. We can know all of those things, and still there has to be some room for grieving. And I just don't think that as a society we have as much compassion for grieving people as we should have, right? And I saw this firsthand, and I've talked about this before, just in how the language around, say, when my mother lost my father, or when my mother-in-law lost my father-in-law, and just, in beyond just my family, I see this in general. Even having lost my brother when he was only 25, there's this, I think, there's this uncomfortableness around talking about death. And so that's part of it. And then, but then there's this sense that there's a timeline to it, or that, after a certain period of time, a person should be over it and through it and done with it. And that, yeah, and that there's an end to the grieving process. And I just don't think that that's fair, and I don't think it's truthful. And so if we take this beyond just, the grieving of the loss of a loved one to death, and we apply it to our relationships, it becomes even more complicated, because even people who know the whole dynamics of the relationship and recognize how unhealthy it was for you, and I think that's part of it too. It's like, well, you're out of it now, so just get over it, move on, right? Like, phew, you dodged a bullet. And so there should be this sense of relief, and yes, there is. There's also the grief, and we don't talk about it enough, and we don't allow space for it enough, and we don't have enough compassion around it, right? So, and this, I think, is especially true when when it's a toxic relationship. So I think, there's a lot more maybe compassion given to someone who, people recognize that it just wasn't meant to be, or, that both people have kind of moved on because they recognize that they're not in fact meant to stay together, and it's more amicable, and so people will be understanding and whatnot. Or if the other person did you wrong, there's a lot of understanding around that, but there's still this timeline for it. There's still this thought that you should be past this by a certain point, and you should be feeling this at this point, and you should be feeling that at that point. And there's just this thought that you snap a finger, and once you've done all of these things, you will be over that relationship. And I don't think that's fair, because we don't take into consideration how much this relationship was built on dreams and goals and hope, right? As is all relationships, and I include my own with my now, with my husband. So if if my husband and I don't have dreams or goals for the future, then there's nothing for me to mourn, us, because the past has already happened. I already had those memories, and I'll always have those memories. That can't be, that's not going to go away. But what I would really be mourning is the future plans that I have in my mind, that we've talked about, that we dream about together. That's what I would be mourning. And it wouldn't matter how the relationship ended, whether it was through, a death of either one of us, or, the relationship dissolving in some other way. There still needs to be space for that work of grief, right? And then in the case of toxic relationships, I think it's really important to recognize what parts of you were lost in the relationship, and do some grieving around that, and also maybe some work around reclaiming those parts of yourself. And then also, as part of that journey, what hopefully will happen is that, yes, you'll grieve those things, and the pain of the loss will become a little bit more and more bearable as time goes on, as you start to create new dreams and new, memories, in your present life, right? So as time goes on, they do fade, but there's a part of you that will be forever changed because of that relationship. And I think it's important that we give that, the weight that it's due, right? That we understand that there's a part of ourselves that was maybe lost. Maybe it was naivety. Maybe it was, childishness, or child, like childlike joy. That's what I'm trying to say, not childishness. But like a childlike joy. Maybe there was some innocence lost. Maybe there was a sense of confidence lost. Maybe there was our sense of safety that was lost. Like, so there's so many things that we need to acknowledge were lost, grieving them, and then finding ways to integrate those into our being, and find new ways to heal those parts of ourselves, to integrate and heal. And through that process, we heal from the grief. But again, there's always a part of us, right? So it's been, almost 31 years since we lost my brother in an accident. And there's not a part of me that's not still grieving that loss, right? That will always exist inside of me. It's not as big a part, obviously, as when it was still very new and fresh. And it will always be a part of me. So I need to acknowledge that. I need to, do whatever work I need to do around that. But I think just acknowledging the fact that it is a part of who I am, it's a part of my history, it's a part of my being, that there's this part of me that mourns the loss of my brother, right? So there'll always be maybe a part of you that mourns certain aspects of that relationship, or certain parts of yourself that was lost due to that relationship. And I think that's natural. And I think we need to, create some more understanding around that, and less stigma around, healing from a toxic relationship, so that people feel free to talk about their experiences of pain and how it's affected them. Okay, so I hope this helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, how do you feel about grief? What's been your experience if you've gone through a terrible breakup? What's been your experience around talking about your feelings with maybe your friends or your loved ones, past a certain maybe time frame? Or what feelings do you get when you talk about how it impacted you, even if it's been a while since the breakup or since the relationship ended, right? I'd love to hear your experiences around that if you're willing to share. So feel free to share in the comments. And does anything that I'm saying here resonate? Like, do you feel like that people are very dismissive of it, or have you been supported really well through those kinds of situations? So, and if you were, what was the best ways that people were able to support your journey? Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Namaste.